Everyone in the kingdom laughed when the prince chose the Omega they called worthless, but they stopped laughing the moment they realized he was the only person the palace could not ignore. The grand halls of Eldoria had never felt colder than they did on the day Ethan Caldwell arrived for his royal wedding. Thousands of crystal lights shimmered above the marble floors, golden banners stretched across the walls, and nobles dressed in their finest clothes watched from every corner. Yet Ethan felt none of the warmth that the celebration was supposed to bring. He felt the weight of every whisper. That is the Omega from the fallen family, the one with no reputation, the one who should be grateful anyone noticed him. Ethan kept his expression calm, even as those words followed him like shadows. He had spent years learning how to survive in a world that decided his value before knowing his name. To them, he was fragile, forgettable, a mistake written into history. But they did not know everything about him. They did not know the secrets his family had protected for generations. They did not know that silence was a choice, not a weakness. And they certainly did not know why the royal family had agreed to this marriage. At the center of the ceremony stood Prince Adrian Whitmore, the future ruler of Eldoria. The Alpha Prince was known throughout the kingdom for his discipline, intelligence, and impossible standards. People said he never made emotional decisions. People said he never trusted anyone easily. So when the announcement came that Adrian would marry Ethan, the entire kingdom was confused. Some called it a political arrangement. Others called it a mistake. Ethan himself wondered the same thing. Why would a prince like Adrian choose someone like him? As Ethan reached the altar, he finally looked into Adrian's eyes. The prince's silver gaze was calm, unreadable, almost impossible to understand. But unlike everyone else in the room, Adrian was not looking at him with pity. He was studying him, as if he knew there was something hidden beneath the rumors, as if he saw the person everyone else refused to see. "Do you understand what this marriage means?" Adrian asked quietly. Ethan held his gaze. "It means I become the person everyone blames when something goes wrong." For the first time, a small change appeared in Adrian's expression. Not anger, not disappointment, something closer to respect. "No," Adrian replied. "It means you stand beside me when everyone else chooses a side." The ceremony continued, but Ethan could feel the atmosphere shifting. The people who had expected him to look defeated were watching more carefully now. They noticed the way he carried himself. They noticed he never lowered his eyes. They noticed that beneath the quiet exterior was someone far stronger than the rumors suggested. Later that evening, inside the vast royal residence, Ethan stood near a window overlooking the city lights. He had spent his entire life being told he was not enough. But tonight, for the first time, someone had chosen him without hesitation. Behind him, Adrian entered the room silently. "You are wondering why I agreed to this," the prince said. Ethan turned around. "Aren't you?" Adrian walked closer, his expression serious. "I do not make choices based on what people say. I make them based on what I see." Ethan looked away, unsure how to respond. Because for years, everyone had seen an Omega they called trash. But Adrian had seen something else. Something hidden. Something powerful. And before the night was over, the entire kingdom would learn that they had made a terrible mistake by underestimating him. The first night inside the royal residence was supposed to feel like a victory, but Ethan Caldwell quickly learned that a beautiful palace could still feel like a place where every step was being measured. The halls were enormous, with polished marble floors, towering windows, and portraits of past rulers watching from golden frames. Yet the silence around him felt heavier than the noise of the wedding ceremony. Ethan had spent years being judged by people who never tried to understand him, but the royal household was different. Here, every servant, every advisor, and every noble seemed to be waiting to discover whether the rumors were true. Was he really as insignificant as everyone claimed? Ethan walked through the residence with quiet confidence, refusing to let the whispers control him. He knew exactly what people saw when they looked at him. They saw a young Omega from a family that had lost its influence. They saw someone who had no obvious achievements and no powerful allies. But Ethan also knew something they did not. A person could be underestimated for years and still know exactly who they were. As the days passed, Prince Adrian Whitmore began noticing the small details everyone else ignored. Ethan remembered the names of servants who had worked at the palace for decades. He noticed when someone looked uncomfortable during a meeting. He listened more than he spoke. These were not the actions of someone weak. These were the actions of someone who understood people. One afternoon, Adrian found Ethan in the palace library, surrounded by old records and forgotten documents. The prince paused at the doorway. Most people who enter this room search for power, Adrian said. Ethan looked up from the book in his hands. And what do you think I am searching for? Adrian studied him for a moment. The truth. Ethan closed the book slowly. Sometimes the truth is the one thing powerful people fear the most. That answer stayed with Adrian long after he left the library. The prince had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. They wanted influence, approval, or a place closer to the throne. Ethan was different. He did not try to impress him. He did not pretend to be someone else. He simply existed with a quiet strength that Adrian could not ignore. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled with a question of his own. He had expected Adrian to treat him like a responsibility, another piece in a political agreement. But the prince had shown him patience. He had defended Ethan's place beside him without hesitation. It was confusing. After a lifetime of being dismissed, kindness felt unfamiliar. That evening, Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking Eldoria. The city stretched beneath him with thousands of glowing lights. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. A future where he was not defined by the opinions of others. A future where he could finally stop hiding every part of himself. Then Adrian joined him. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood beside Ethan, sharing the quiet. You know, Adrian finally said, most people would have tried to prove everyone wrong by now. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe I do not need to prove anything. Adrian looked at him carefully. That might be the reason you are different. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. They did not know that the peaceful days inside the palace were only the beginning of something much bigger. But for the first time, Adrian and Ethan were no longer strangers connected only by duty. They were two people slowly discovering that the person everyone overlooked might be the one person who mattered most. The days inside Eldoria Palace began to change in ways neither Adrian nor Ethan expected. What started as a marriage built on responsibility slowly became something more complicated. Not love yet, not trust completely, but something neither of them could ignore. A quiet understanding. A connection formed through small moments that no one else noticed. Ethan continued learning the rhythm of royal life. He attended meetings, studied the history of the kingdom, and observed the people around him with the same careful attention that Adrian had started to admire. While others focused on appearances and status, Ethan looked deeper. He noticed the concerns hidden behind polite smiles. He noticed the servants who worked late into the evening and the advisors who avoided difficult conversations. Adrian had always believed leadership required strength, but Ethan showed him that understanding people was another kind of power. One morning, the two of them walked through the eastern gardens of the palace. The gardens stretched across several acres, filled with carefully maintained flowers, tall trees, and peaceful paths away from the noise of court life. You seem comfortable here, Adrian said. Ethan looked around. I am still learning. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You do not look like someone who is learning. Ethan smiled slightly. That is because I spent most of my life learning how to survive being underestimated. The answer was simple, but Adrian felt the meaning behind it. He knew what it was like to carry expectations. The difference was that people respected him because of his title. Ethan had earned respect without anyone giving him a reason to believe it was possible. Later that day, a royal council meeting was held to discuss important matters concerning the kingdom. Several nobles arrived with carefully prepared opinions, but their attention quickly shifted toward Ethan. They expected him to remain silent. They expected him to simply stand beside Adrian and accept whatever decisions were made. Instead, Ethan calmly offered a different perspective on a problem affecting the northern regions. His words were thoughtful, clear, and supported by information others had overlooked. The room became quiet. For a moment, no one knew how to respond. Adrian watched from his seat, hiding his surprise behind his usual calm expression. This was the same person they had called insignificant. The same person they had dismissed before knowing his name. Yet here he was, speaking with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. After the meeting ended, Adrian found Ethan alone in the hallway. You surprised them, Adrian said. Ethan looked toward the windows. They were already surprised before I spoke. They just did not expect to be wrong. A rare smile appeared on Adrian's face. You really do not care what they think. Ethan paused. I cared for a long time. I just learned that carrying everyone else's opinions becomes too heavy. Adrian remembered those words. He understood them more than he wanted to admit. That evening, the palace prepared for a formal gathering. Music filled the grand halls. Guests arrived from across the kingdom, and everyone watched the prince and his new partner carefully. But beneath the elegance of the event, something felt different. Ethan was no longer standing beside Adrian as a forgotten Omega from a fallen family. He was standing there as someone the prince genuinely respected. And while the kingdom slowly began questioning everything they believed about Ethan, somewhere beyond the palace walls, others were paying attention too. Hidden eyes were watching. Old secrets were awakening. The peaceful days Ethan and Adrian had begun to build were becoming impossible for their enemies to ignore. And soon, the quiet life they had found together would be tested in ways neither of them could predict. The celebration inside Eldoria Palace continued late into the evening, but beneath the beautiful music and endless conversations, Ethan Caldwell felt a strange change in the air. It was not something he could explain easily. It was a feeling that something unseen had shifted. The same people who once ignored him were now watching him carefully. The same nobles who whispered behind closed doors were suddenly choosing their words with more caution. Ethan had spent years understanding the difference between kindness and curiosity. Some people were not interested in knowing him. They were simply trying to understand why Prince Adrian Whitmore had chosen him. Adrian noticed the change as well. Standing beside Ethan during the royal gathering, he watched the room with his usual calm expression. But his attention was not on the guests. It was on Ethan. "You are quieter than usual," Adrian said as they stepped into a quieter hallway away from the crowd. Ethan looked toward the tall windows overlooking the city. "I am thinking." "About what?" Adrian asked. Ethan paused before answering. "About how quickly people change when they realize they were wrong." Adrian understood that feeling. As the future ruler of Eldoria, he had spent his life surrounded by expectations. Everyone wanted him to be perfect. Everyone wanted him to make the correct choice every time. But Ethan was the first person who reminded him that being respected was not the same as being understood. Before Adrian could reply, one of the royal advisors approached them with an urgent message. The northern provinces had reported unusual activity near the borders. Nothing had happened yet, but the situation required attention. Adrian immediately shifted into his role as a leader. His expression became focused, his voice steady. Ethan watched him carefully. This was the side of Adrian that the world knew. The prince who carried responsibility without complaint. The prince who never allowed uncertainty to appear. Later that night, Ethan returned to the library. The old records he had been studying earlier were still waiting on the table. He searched through forgotten pages, looking for answers about his family history. There were pieces of information that did not match the stories he had been told growing up. His family had not simply disappeared from influence. Something had been erased. Something important. As Ethan turned another page, he noticed a symbol marked beside an old record. It was a symbol he had seen before, but never understood. The same symbol appeared in documents connected to the earliest days of Eldoria. Before he could study it further, Adrian entered the room. "You found something," the prince said. Ethan looked up. "I think I found something that people wanted forgotten." Adrian walked closer and examined the document. For the first time, Ethan saw uncertainty in his expression. Not fear, not doubt, just the realization that there were parts of history even he did not know. "Why would anyone hide this?" Adrian asked. Ethan closed the book gently. "Because some truths change the way people see the world." The two stood together in silence, both realizing that their marriage had connected them to something much larger than politics. Outside the palace, rumors continued spreading. Some people questioned Ethan. Others questioned Adrian. But neither of them knew that someone else had already begun moving pieces into place. The quiet days were ending. The secrets surrounding Ethan's past were beginning to surface. And soon, the kingdom would discover that the person they had dismissed as unimportant was connected to a history far greater than anyone imagined. The discovery inside the royal library changed the way Ethan Caldwell looked at everything around him. For years, he had believed the stories told about his family. He believed they had simply lost their place in society. He believed the world had moved on and forgotten them. But the old records hidden inside Eldoria Palace told a different story. There was a missing chapter in history, a part that had been carefully removed from official records. And Ethan knew one thing for certain. Someone had wanted the truth to disappear. The next morning, Prince Adrian Whitmore called a private meeting inside his study. The room was filled with old books, detailed maps, and documents collected by generations of rulers. Ethan placed the records on the table between them. Adrian read every page carefully, his expression becoming more serious with each passing moment. "Your family was not insignificant," Adrian finally said. "They were guardians of something important." Ethan looked down at the document. "Then why was I raised believing the opposite?" Adrian did not answer immediately. He knew the question was bigger than any single person. Kingdoms were built on stories, and sometimes those stories were changed by people who wanted control. For the first time, Adrian saw Ethan not only as someone who had survived being underestimated, but as someone who had carried a hidden burden his entire life. Later that day, Adrian and Ethan visited the royal archives together. Unlike the public library, the archives contained records that only members of the royal family could access. They searched through decades of information, looking for connections between Ethan's family and the earliest rulers of Eldoria. The deeper they looked, the clearer the pattern became. Ethan's family had once held a respected position within the kingdom. They were known for wisdom, loyalty, and a rare understanding of the balance between Alpha and Omega communities. But over time, their name had been pushed aside. Their achievements had been forgotten. Their history had been rewritten. Ethan remained quiet as he looked through the records. Adrian noticed. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Ethan traced his finger over an old family symbol printed on the page. "I am thinking about how easy it is for people to believe something just because they hear it often enough." Adrian understood the meaning behind those words. He had seen the same thing happen in court. A rumor repeated enough times became accepted as truth. A person judged enough times began to believe the judgment themselves. But Ethan had not allowed that to happen. That evening, Adrian invited Ethan to walk through the palace courtyard. The air was cool, and the city lights reflected across the quiet gardens. "You know," Adrian said, "when I first agreed to this marriage, I thought I was protecting the kingdom." Ethan looked at him. "And now?" Adrian took a moment before answering. "Now I think the kingdom may have been protecting itself from seeing the wrong person clearly." Ethan was surprised by the honesty. Adrian was not someone who spoke carelessly. Every word he said carried meaning. For the first time, Ethan wondered if the prince truly understood him. Not as a title, not as an Omega, but as Ethan. Yet while they began uncovering the truth together, another secret was moving closer. Someone within the kingdom had noticed their search. Someone who feared what Ethan's return to history could mean. The forgotten past was no longer forgotten. And the closer Ethan came to discovering who he really was, the more the world around him began to change. For the first time in many years, Ethan Caldwell felt like he was standing at the beginning of a new chapter instead of the end of an old one. The truth about his family was no longer a forgotten memory hidden inside dusty records. It was real. It existed. And with every new discovery, Ethan realized that the life he had been forced to accept was built on a story someone else created for him. But knowing the truth also brought new questions. Why had his family been erased from history? Who benefited from keeping their legacy hidden? And why did someone seem determined to make sure Ethan never discovered the answers? Prince Adrian Whitmore noticed the change in Ethan immediately. The Omega who once walked through the palace with quiet uncertainty now carried himself with a new sense of purpose. But Adrian also noticed something else. Ethan was carrying the weight of everything alone. During a private meeting in the royal study, Adrian placed a cup of tea beside him and watched as Ethan reviewed old documents. "You have not rested," Adrian said. Ethan looked up. "There is too much I do not understand." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "You are trying to solve a mystery that has existed for generations in a single night." Ethan looked at the pages in front of him. "For most of my life, people told me I was nothing. I think I need to know why they were so determined to make me believe that." Adrian understood. More than anyone realized, he understood what it felt like to be trapped by expectations. The difference was that Ethan had been fighting against invisibility, while Adrian had spent his life fighting against being seen only as a future king. That shared understanding brought them closer. Not through grand promises. Not through dramatic declarations. Through quiet conversations when the rest of the palace was asleep. Through moments when neither of them needed to pretend. Over the following days, Adrian began standing beside Ethan during important discussions. When nobles questioned Ethan's place in the palace, Adrian did not hesitate to support him. His value is not decided by your opinions, Adrian said calmly during one meeting. It is proven by his actions. Those words spread quickly throughout Eldoria. The people who once dismissed Ethan began seeing him differently. But not everyone was pleased. In a hidden chamber far from the royal residence, members of an old political group discussed the changes happening inside the palace. They had expected Ethan to remain quiet. They had expected Adrian to treat the marriage as a simple arrangement. Instead, the two had become stronger together. The balance they had tried to maintain was beginning to shift. Meanwhile, Ethan discovered another piece of information about his family. The symbol he had found in the archives was connected to a rare tradition that had existed before the current royal system. A tradition built on trust between different communities within the kingdom. Ethan realized his family had not been forgotten because they were unimportant. They had been forgotten because their existence challenged the way certain people wanted the kingdom to operate. That evening, Adrian found Ethan standing in the courtyard, looking at the stars above Eldoria. "You are thinking again," Adrian said. Ethan smiled slightly. "You are starting to notice." Adrian looked at him. "I notice. More than you think." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. But beyond the palace walls, plans were already forming. The secrets Ethan uncovered had reached people who wanted them buried forever. And soon, Adrian and Ethan would discover that protecting the truth would require more than courage. It would require trusting each other completely. The morning after Ethan Caldwell discovered the hidden truth about his family, Eldoria Palace felt different. The same marble halls remained. The same golden banners hung from the walls. The same servants moved quietly through the corridors. Yet something invisible had changed. Ethan was no longer walking through the palace as someone trying to prove he belonged. He was walking as someone searching for the truth that had been taken from him. Prince Adrian Whitmore noticed that determination every day. He saw how Ethan spent hours studying old records, how carefully he listened during meetings, and how he never allowed anger to control his decisions. But Adrian also noticed something troubling. Ethan had started carrying every responsibility as if asking for help was impossible. One afternoon, Adrian found Ethan alone in the archive room, surrounded by documents and handwritten notes. "You have been here since sunrise," Adrian said. Ethan looked up with a tired smile. "There are still unanswered questions." Adrian stepped closer. "And you think you have to answer all of them alone?" Ethan became quiet. The question was simple, but it reached deeper than Adrian expected. For most of his life, Ethan had learned that depending on others came with a cost. People offered kindness only when they wanted something in return. Trust had always been something dangerous. But Adrian was different. He had protected Ethan's place in the palace without asking for anything. He had listened when others ignored him. Slowly, Ethan was beginning to believe that maybe not every connection was built on expectations. Meanwhile, the palace council became more divided. Some nobles accepted that Ethan had earned his position through intelligence and patience. Others refused to let go of the old rumors. They believed the past should remain hidden, and they feared what would happen if the truth became known. Adrian recognized the growing tension. "They are not afraid of you," he told Ethan during a quiet walk through the gardens. Ethan looked surprised. "Then what are they afraid of?" Adrian looked toward the palace walls. "They are afraid of losing control over a story they created." Ethan thought about those words for a long moment. He had spent years believing he needed to convince people that he had value. But now he realized something important. The truth did not become real because others accepted it. It was real because it existed. Later that evening, Ethan found another record hidden among the royal documents. It revealed that his family had once been trusted advisors who helped maintain peace throughout Eldoria. Their role was not based on power or status. It was based on understanding, balance, and loyalty. Ethan stared at the page, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. He finally understood why his family had been pushed into silence. Their legacy represented something that certain people wanted to control. When Adrian joined him, Ethan handed him the document without speaking. Adrian read it carefully. "You should have known this from the beginning," Adrian said quietly. Ethan looked away. "Maybe, but maybe I needed to discover it myself." Adrian respected that answer. He understood that Ethan's journey was not only about uncovering history. It was about reclaiming his own identity. But as the two continued searching for answers, they did not realize that someone inside the kingdom was watching their every move. A person with influence. A person who knew the hidden parts of Eldoria's past. And a person who understood that if Ethan discovered the entire truth, the future of the kingdom would never be the same again. The truth about Ethan Caldwell's family was no longer hidden inside forgotten records. But the closer Ethan and Adrian came to understanding the past, the more complicated the present became. Eldoria Palace had always been a place of tradition and order, but now every conversation seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Every decision felt connected to a history that had been waiting years to return. Ethan could feel the change around him. The same people who once dismissed him now watched him carefully. Some had begun to respect him, while others quietly searched for reasons to doubt him. But Ethan was no longer the person who entered the palace unsure of his place. He had discovered where he came from, and that knowledge gave him a confidence he had never felt before. Adrian saw that transformation more clearly than anyone. He saw how Ethan handled pressure without losing his kindness. He saw how Ethan could walk into a room filled with judgment and still remain calm. For a prince who had spent his entire life surrounded by people trying to impress him, Ethan's honesty was something rare. One evening, Adrian invited Ethan to the highest balcony of the palace. From there, they could see the entire capital of Eldoria glowing beneath the night sky. The city that Adrian was expected to lead one day stretched endlessly before them. When I was younger, I thought being a ruler meant having all the answers, Adrian said quietly. Ethan looked at him. And now? Adrian smiled slightly. Now I think it means knowing who you can trust when you do not have them. Ethan was silent for a moment. Those words meant more than Adrian realized. Trust had never come easily to him. But somewhere along the way, the prince had become the person Ethan looked for when the world felt uncertain. Not because of his title, not because of his power, because Adrian listened, because Adrian saw him. The next morning, a formal council meeting was held inside the palace. Several nobles gathered to discuss the future of Eldoria, and for the first time, Ethan was invited to participate as an equal. The room became quiet when he entered. Years ago, the same people would have ignored his presence. Now they waited for his opinion. Ethan spoke carefully, offering ideas based on the knowledge he had uncovered about his family's legacy. He explained that strength did not come from one group controlling another. A kingdom became stronger when different people worked together. Some members of the council agreed. Others remained silent. Adrian noticed those silent reactions. He knew silence could reveal more than words. After the meeting, Ethan and Adrian reviewed the remaining documents connected to Ethan's family. Hidden among the records was one final message left by Ethan's ancestors. It was not a warning. It was not a command. It was a reminder. A true guardian does not protect power. A true guardian protects people. Ethan read the words several times. For years, he had believed his purpose was to prove everyone wrong. But now he understood something deeper. His journey was never about revenge or recognition. It was about becoming the person his family believed he could be. Meanwhile, far from the palace, those who feared Ethan's discovery began making their final plans. They knew the old secrets could no longer remain buried. They knew Adrian and Ethan had grown stronger together. The future of Eldoria was changing, and they could no longer stop it by hiding the truth. As the night settled over the kingdom, Adrian stood beside Ethan in the palace courtyard. Neither of them spoke about the uncertainty ahead. They did not need to. They both understood that whatever came next, they would face it together. The person once overlooked by everyone had found his place. And the prince who never trusted anyone had finally found someone worth trusting. The days that followed brought a new feeling to Eldoria. For the first time in years, the kingdom began looking toward the future instead of holding onto old divisions. The changes did not happen overnight. Trust was not built with a single speech or a single decision. It was built through countless small moments, through people seeing something different from what they expected. And no one represented that change more than Ethan Caldwell. The Omega who had once been dismissed as unimportant now stood beside Prince Adrian Whitmore, not as someone protected by the crown, but as someone who helped shape its direction. The palace halls that once carried whispers about Ethan's weakness now carried conversations about his wisdom. But Ethan knew that the most important victory was not changing how others saw him. It was changing how he saw himself. For so long, He had carried the belief that he needed to prove his worth. Now he understood that his worth had always existed. It simply took the right person to recognize it. Adrian noticed that difference too. One morning, as they walked through the royal gardens, he looked at Ethan with quiet admiration. You know, when you first arrived here, everyone expected you to disappear into the background. Ethan smiled softly. I noticed. Adrian looked ahead at the path before them. But you never did. Ethan stopped for a moment. The prince's words stayed with him. Not because they were flattering, but because they were true. He had spent years trying to survive a world that wanted him to be smaller. Yet he had never actually lost himself. He had only been waiting for a place where he could finally be seen. Later that week, Adrian and Ethan stood before the people of Eldoria during a royal gathering. The announcement was not about power or status. It was about unity. Adrian spoke about the importance of respecting every person in the kingdom, regardless of background or reputation. Then he invited Ethan to speak. The crowd became silent. Years earlier, many of those same people would have ignored his voice. Ethan looked across the kingdom and remembered everything he had experienced. The judgment, the doubt, the loneliness. But he also remembered the moments that changed everything. The people who believed in him. The person who stood beside him when others looked away. A person's value is not decided by the rumors created about them, Ethan said. It is discovered through the choices they make and the kindness they show. His words traveled across Eldoria. They were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had overcome. After the gathering ended, Ethan and Adrian returned to the palace. The future was still uncertain. There were still challenges ahead. There were still people who resisted change. But something important had already happened. The kingdom had learned the truth about Ethan Caldwell. Not the version created by rumors. Not the version shaped by prejudice. The real person. The thoughtful, determined, and compassionate Omega who had changed the way Eldoria understood strength. That evening, Ethan stood beside Adrian beneath the lights of the palace courtyard. The same place where they had once stood as two strangers connected by duty now felt completely different. Adrian looked at him and smiled. Do you ever think about how different everything would be if we had never met? Ethan looked toward the palace windows glowing in the distance. I think we both would have remained exactly who we were. We just would not have known it yet. Adrian nodded, understanding the meaning behind those words. Their story had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about discovering the truth hidden beneath appearances. And as Eldoria entered a new era, the kingdom finally understood something that Ethan had known all along. The person everyone overlooked was often the person who could change everything.